All right, so we are to the MPEP 300. So this review is going to be about ownership. So pretty quick review, not a ton. Honestly, I bet a lot of these questions will be lookup questions, but I think that there's some red line rules. They can be memorized pretty easily. So starting out with inventorship again, a patent is applied for by all the true inventors. And so this wasn't necessarily in the MPEP where I was seeing, but I brought up USC 101. And so that is just going to be the statutory definition for inventors, right? So if you are applying for a patent and you did not invent that patent, then it would be rejected under the 101 statute. So if it's wrong, the patent is invalid until corrected. So kind of obvious, but good to know. The PTO can determine the inventorship through the derivation proceedings. And so this is important to remember because this is an area where the PTO does have jurisdiction versus, as we'll see in a moment, for ownership, PTO doesn't have jurisdiction there. So inventorship, yes, ownership, no. So you have to be human. The age is irrelevant, and you have to be human and not an employee of the U.S. Patent Office. Now, as far as ownership, a patent can be bought or sold as property. So that is something that you might see later on in that, like when something is assigned, that doesn't mean that it is sold. That doesn't count as an offer of sale. That doesn't count as prior art, right? Because these are patent rights. This isn't the actual invention, right? So this is the intellectual property that's being bought or sold. Ownership is used to determine the enforceability. So an assignee can block an inventor from participation in prosecution. And so that's like kind of a big deal. So you want to make sure that whoever you are assigning your patent to, that you actually you either have to, or that's okay if that risk were to happen, if there were to be some sort of falling out, because they can block from participation, which would be pretty terrible if that was your invention. So the PTO, kind of like what we just said, does not have jurisdiction, only the courts. And then this can be any legal entity, so a corporation, etc. So basic requirements of an assignment has to be in writing, right? So for legal transfer, this is not the same as recording. So for an assignment, it has to be in writing. That's it. So even if it's in some other language or anything like that, it just has to be in writing for an assignment to be legal. Then as far as for recording, these are a little bit more straightforward. It has to be English or accompanied by a full English translation. So they used to accept partial translations, but not anymore. It has to be a full translation. It has to identify the patent number, application number, or if you're filing the assignment with an application, right? So it hasn't been, in that case, it hasn't been assigned an application number. Then you have to identify the date of the oath declaration execution, name all the inventors, and then the title of application. So the little provisional things, name of inventor, that's one of two things needed in provisional, and the title of the application is two of two things needed in provisional, right? Because there is no oath or declaration in a provisional. So then as far as the fee, that occurs only when submitting on paper, right? So if you are filing or recording on an electronic filing system, it is free. So yay. And it has to be legible and only on one side of paper. I know there's one part, I couldn't find it exactly which kind of paper, but I know A4 paper is one of the required papers. And I think there's one other one, but I saw that in an example question of an old test once. So maybe good to file away there. And you have to identify the original or certified copy of that recorded piece of paper or whatever, however that recording occurred. And then be accompanied by a cover sheet. And the cover sheet, what needs to be on that is all in MPEP 300. And if that was a question, I would just look that up. I wouldn't necessarily memorize that. As far as which assignments are available, kind of follow the same logic as which applications are available, right? So issued patents, the recorded assignments are always available there. For pending or abandoned, it's pretty much the similar rules for assignments as general applications. For assignments and continuations, mentioned this in the last video if you watched it, but basically the assignments carry over in continuations, like just basic continuations and divisionals and replacement utility, so substitute. But a new assignment is needed in the case of a continuation in part, right? Because you have new information, new aspects of the invention, and therefore a new assignment is needed. For submitting assignments, faxes are allowed when, and a certificate of transmission, you can get a benefit of that, right? So you get it from when it started transmitting rather than when it gets there, get that benefit. So that is allowed when you identify the application or patent number, one cover sheet, and the recordation fee, right? So if a recordation recording is filed on paper, you have to have a fee. So same with fax, right? Because it's on paper, so you have to have a fee. However, it cannot be filed by fax if it's filed with a newly filed application. So that just follows that same logic with when you can use faxes, which we'll come to later. You can never fax a new application. So in that case, you obviously couldn't fax some documents which would go with the newly filed application. Something with 2 or more cover sheets, and then request for an at-cost recordation service. So then the electronic assignment system can be used when including the identified application patent number, 1 cover sheet, and the fee is 0, kind of like what we talked about before. And then who in the world can never file applications? So this is just in the MPEP 300. So that's going to be an employee of the USPTO during their period of employment and 1 year thereafter, unless they inherited it or it was given for free in some way. So for second buyer rules, this is under the statute 261, and honestly the statute is very confusing. So the way that I would just remember it is if the first buyer does not record that assignment within the later of 3 months, or the second assignment, and the second buyer didn't know about the first buyer, and the second buyer took for consideration, right? So they paid for it. They did not inherit it or receive it in some other way of that. Then in that case, they would be able to legally take on the assignment. So then for correcting errors in a recorded document, it has to be identified. You have to submit something that's identified as a corrective document. For the typo on a recorded cover sheet, you have to include a copy of that original recorded assignment document and corrected cover sheet and a fee, of course. For the assignment or the change of name that's improper. And this is, of course, after the owner contacted the party who recorded the incorrect information. So not exactly sure the circumstances this one occurs under, but kind of interesting to follow. But that one you would need a completed, this is all submitted by the patent owner, a completed cover sheet identifying the application or the patent, the affidavit or declaration which IDs the correct owner, states the previous recorded document is erroneous, and a real frame for what that previous recorded document is, and then of course a fee. So that is actually all I have for recorded documents and ownership and assignment. So I think that a lot more comes up as you read other parts of the MPEP as far as what assignees can and cannot do, but I think these are all just really basics for what that looks like assigning a document. So thank you so much. Hope it helps.